Half a century of air supply. It was actually in this week, 50 years ago, that air supply effectively began when Graham Russell met Russell Hitchcock. And the song I just played, Lost in Love, of course, was a huge hit in 1979 and 1980, but it all began really about 5 years earlier. I'm delighted to say that Graham Russell joins us from New York to talk about the early days of air supply. Hi, Graham. Good to talk to you again.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity. Good to be with you.
Well, take me back to that moment, May the 12th, 1975. You're in the chorus, the cast of Jesus Christ Superstar with
Yeah.
Russell Hitchcock, and something magical. You noticed something magical.
Well, there was, Russell at the audition. Russell sat next to me, and we didn't know each other. Nobody really knew anybody else in the room. There were 34 people there, and we were all very nervous. But Russell and I sat next to each other just by chance. And when we all started to sing together for the first time, the chorus, I mean, it sounded incredible, but Russell's voice just stood out to me, and I went, oh wow, uh, and straight away I thought, I need to meet this guy. I'd like to work with him. I'd always, I mean, I sing, but I'm not a lead singer, so I was always thinking, I need a great singer to work with, and so I introduced myself, and we met, and we became great friends straight away, which was kind of unusual. And I really didn't befriend anybody else from the cast until later on. But Russell and I agreed just a few days after to create a band together, and under the tenet that I wanted to write songs and he would sing them, and that was our agreement, because he didn't want to write songs, and I didn't want to be the lead singer, so it was a perfect match. And we, under those auspices, we became great friends and started to work straight away on the band.
And it was amazing to think that originally it was a trio with Chrissy Hammond, who was also in the cast, and we know her from Cheetah in the
Yeah,
1970s. So there were three of you to begin with, weren't there? And I know that you came up with the idea of the name for Air Supply in a dream.
yeah, I did. Well, when we'd formed the band, we'd made "Loving of the Bruises" a single, but we didn't have a name. And our producer at the time, Peter Dawkins, who was an excellent producer, said, we need a name by tomorrow because the record's going to come out. And so we agreed that whoever had a decent name the next morning, we would go with. And that night I had a dream of a big billboard, and on the perimeter were flashing lights, and it was pure white. And in the middle were two words, and it said Air Supply. And I didn't know what it meant, but I told Russell the next morning, and he said, well, we don't have anything else. We've got to go with it. We didn't know what it means, but we went with it. But it's funny you mentioned Chrissy Hammond, because about 2 years ago, I became back in touch with her, and she flew from London to be here at our show tomorrow night. And Russell hasn't seen her since those days, so 50 years ago, and we had dinner last night. So it's interesting that you mentioned her, because she's a wonderful person, a great singer, and now she's here going to share our 50th anniversary together, which is wonderful.
That's amazing. You mentioned Love and Other Bruises. Let's have a listen to this song. It was really the first hit for Air Supply in Australia, and I'd say it's probably one of my favorite Air Supply songs.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's one of mine too. I have like three or four that I just love, and that's certainly one of them. And, when, neither of us had been in a recording studio before when we recorded it. And when we heard it coming back on the big speakers, we were just in tears because it sounded so good. But it was more than that for us. It was like we could feel it was the beginning of something. It just sounded incredible when we heard it back, and with the orchestra, we went, oh, wow. And we just felt that it's going to be a hit. And of course it was. And that was the beginning of our journey, which is a long time ago, of course.
We're speaking about 50 years of Air Supply with Graham Russell, chief songwriter, and of course, half of the band that we've loved for 50 years since May of 1975. Now, I'm quite intrigued by the early days, Graham, because obviously you toured with Rod Stewart early
Yeah.
on, which was a great break. But then
Yeah.
after you went to the US, you came back, and a lot of Australians had forgotten about you, and you're struggling. You didn't have a lot of money.
We had no money. We'd been with Rod for 3 months, and that was an incredible experience. But we didn't make any money. What we made was all spent. Uh, so we came back, and they had forgotten about us, which is, understandable. We'd been away for a few months, and we thought we would come back to a hero's welcome because nobody really been on a big tour with, Rod was the biggest artist in the world at that time, and nobody had ever done that before. But it was a lesson that we learned. We were living large with Rod for 3 months, and then came back, and we couldn't even get work. Nobody wanted to hire us, so we had to start again. And I said to Russell wanted to stop and give it up, and he said, "Well, we've had a great ride, but now maybe it's time to stop." And then I had a chat with him, and he said, "Okay, we're gonna dig in again." So I went away and I wrote uh, about a dozen songs, and I called him up and I said, "I think I've got some really good new songs." And he came to see me, and I was living in Adelaide then, and he came on a bus for like 20 hours from Sydney. And the first song I played him just on acoustic guitar was Lost in Love. And I didn't think at that point, I thought it was a good song, but I didn't think it was going to be what it became. But he stopped me and he said, "This is the one. This is going to bring us back." And he was right. So from that moment on, I always listened to his advice, especially in the studio. He's got a great ear for songs. And, I play him new songs all the time, and he'll go, "That one and that one." So he's got a great ear. But the great thing about our relationship is Russell lets me do what I do best, uh, create the albums, write the songs, and Russell does what he does best, which is sing them all. And in my opinion, nobody can touch him. Certainly in those days, he was untouchable, and he sang all those big hits in one take. And which was quite amazing. Nobody does that these days.
You just mentioned he does what he does best. It reminds me of an early song that you had with Air Supply, probably about 1977, called "Do What You Do." And my friend Rex Go played guitar in that on that song. And
Yeah.
I had listened to it the other day. We're going to play it in a minute. But I love that song, and it's quite different to the sound that Air Supply would develop in the 1980s.
Yes, it was very different. I think in the early days in Australia, we were searching for our identity. We never planned anything. We never planned to write and record all these big epic love songs. It's just the way it happened. But Do What You Do was a bit of a departure. And of course, we had Rex Go in the band then, and he was very influential on the track. I mean, he's a brilliant guitarist, of course, and he was with us for some time. And I remember actually recording that. It was a lot of fun, and his guitar parts were always incredible. He was, in my opinion, one of the greatest guitar players in Australia, and probably still is. But it's a great record. It was a hit, but it wasn't a big hit in Australia.
We just heard "Do What You Do" by Air Supply from 1977, just getting to the edges of the top 40 a long time ago. Graham Russell is our guest. He's the man that wrote many of the great songs for Air Supply, of course, has been in the band half a century. I mean, when you think about half a century, what do you say, Graham? Do you ever think that, wow, it's been that long, or does it seem like yesterday when it all began?
You know, it seems like both. When we stop and think about it, it's quite amazing. In fact, we went out last night. We got into New York, and we had a family and friends dinner for about 60 people. And Russell and I were there early, and he came up to me and he says, it's 60 years. Can you believe it? And I said, it's bizarre. It's a weird thing. I mean, who goes into a band and can predict you're going to be together for that long? I mean, I know there are a lot of bands that are even beyond that, but for us, it was quite something, especially with our kind of music. It's not like we're a rock and roll band or AC/DC or something. Our journey in the beginning was a difficult one before we hit it really big around the world in 1980. But we kept going. We believed in ourselves, and here we are all this time. You're right. It's half a century. That's incredible. And the weird thing is, we both feel great. We're both fit, and we're going to be going a long time yet. So who knows where the journey will end?
A
It's hard
turning
to predict.
a turning point was Clive Davis and Arista believing in the band, and in
Yeah,
many ways that would have been a difficult thing because you had to re-record some of the songs you'd done in Australia with Australian musicians. How
yeah.
tough was that?
It was difficult because we really believed in what we'd done, but Clive convinced us to add a few things here and there, and so we did. Once I was in Clive's office, and there was a music publisher in the office too that I was about to sign with, and his name was Billy Michelle. He was quite a famous music publisher, and he came up to me and he whispered in my ear and he said, "If you listen to Clive, he'll send you through the roof. He'll make you what you want to be, and he'll make you a lot of money if you listen to him." Although money for me was never an objective. I never really bothered about it. I never had any up to that point. When I grew up, my family, we never had a phone or a car or anything. But he said, "Listen to Clive, and he'll give you a great career." And I did. Both Russell and I did, and we're glad we did now. But Clive would say, "Oh, you've just got to change a few lyrics here and there for the American market." And I was reluctant to do that at first, as any songwriter is. Songwriters don't like people telling them what to do. But I listened to Clive, and he was right, and he was right for the next several years. So he was a big part of our career. But you're right, he just liked us. I don't know what it was. The coming from Australia, he didn't have an Australian act, but he just liked us. We'd go out to dinner with him often in New York or Los Angeles, and we just hit it off, and a lot of people didn't, because he could be quite difficult. But with us, it was all plain sailing. And I think he saw an opportunity with us because we were new, we were fresh, we were pretty green, that he could put us in a certain direction that we would follow. And so together we defined our sound, and it became a worldwide success.
Well, part of that sound was All Out of Love that Clive Davis produced. It was a massive hit around the world. Let's hear that, and we'll continue our conversation with Graham Russell. It's 50 years, can you believe it, since Air Supply effectively began. Graham Russell is our guest, the man that wrote so many of those beautiful songs that Air Supply came up with. Now, you're a fellow Beatles tragic like I am, Graham. I once interviewed Pete Best. That was my claim to fame, but and he recently retired from
Yeah.
music, as you probably heard. I know you met Ringo Starr, but growing up in Nottinghamshire, how big an influence were the Beatles, and did you ever get to meet your hero Paul McCartney?
I never got to meet Paul, and that's my goal in my career, that I'd love to achieve. I'd love to meet Paul, and so would Russell. The Beatles were everything growing up. I used to cut things. They were in the paper in England every day, and I had a scrapbooks and put paste their pictures everywhere, and they were just really hugely instrumental with me. Before I heard the Beatles, I was already writing songs, but I went to see them when I was 14, in Nottingham at the local cinema, and I was transfixed. I mean, you couldn't hear anything because everybody was screaming, but it was just the energy. And when I heard them live, everything fell into place, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be in a rock and roll band. And I never deviated from that. And it wasn't because everybody else wanted to be a Beatle. For me, it was the real thing. I wanted to be a songwriter, and my goal was to be able to earn a living writing songs. But that was so far away. But for a 14-year-old, they're the kind of dreams that you hang on to and that shape your life. And for me, that's exactly what happened. And, I learned to play guitar, and I just was writing songs all the time. I mean, several songs a week. And I look back at them now and they're probably terrible, but it gave me a great education about writing songs and how to do it and what people like to hear, and to push those buttons, those emotional buttons with people. And that's what I try to do. Plus, I'm an emotional person, and so I write down what I'm feeling. And I did that as a teenager, and I still do that. So for me, it was all the Beatles. It really was. And I'll tell you a quick story. Russell and I had dinner in 1982 with George Martin in Los Angeles. And we both agreed that we wouldn't ask him about the Beatles. So we had lunch, and we got the bill, and we insisted that we pay the bill, and it was just the three of us. And then we were just about to say, okay, thanks, George, and, and all that. And he said, aren't you going to ask me any Beatles questions? So once we got the green light, we sat there for another 2 hours talking about all the stories we'd heard of Strawberry Fields. And so, but we wanted it to come from him, because obviously he would always be barraged by Beatle fans. But that was our Beatles story. But I've never met Paul, but Ringo was delightful, I must say. He was a wonderful person, and so that's my Beatles claim to fame. But I hope one day to meet Paul. I hope that happens.
Do you have a favorite Beatles song? Is there one that you pinpoint, or
Yeah,
does it change all the time?
yeah. Growing up, I always loved the Hard Day's Night soundtrack. My favorite Beatles song is a very simple one, and it's "If I Fell." Because when I first heard it, I thought, what a beautiful song in its simplicity. And just the two-part harmony, I thought, oh, wow. If I could ever write a song half as good as that, I will have achieved my life's goal. And for me, it's not their greatest song, but for me, it's my favorite.
It's 50 years since Air Supply began, the 12th of May 1975, when Graham Russell met Russell Hitchcock. Our special guest is Graham Russell. Graham, we're going to go out with Making Love Out of Nothing at All, which was, of course,
Yeah.
a hit that came fairly early on. Maybe you could introduce this for our listeners, and also just give us an overview of what's ahead for you and Russell.
Well, Making Love Out of Nothing at All came about because of Clive. He obviously knew Jim Steinman, and I was a huge Jim Steinman fan at that time. I was really into Meatloaf. And Clive, he called us and he said, I just had dinner with Jim Steinman, and he wanted to know if you were interested in singing this song. And so we went over to Clive's office, and he played it for us, and it was like 8 minutes long. And I thought, oh my God, we're going to have to cut this down. But it was incredible. And it was a true Steinman-esque, big, epic song. And, but it was a different style for us. But Clive said, no, he says, if you record this song, it'll go to number one, and it'll solidify your career for a long time. But that's not the reason we did it. Russell loved it, and so did I. But we knew it was going to be all Russell singing it. And so we decided to do it. And when we were in the studio a few days later with Jim, uh, I was sitting next to Jim, and Russell was in the singing booth at the record plant in New York. And the track had all been done, and Russell went in to sing. They got a level on his voice, and Jim said, I'd like you to sing it over maybe 6 times to really get into the song. And Russell sang it top to bottom for the first time. And I'll never forget this. Jim turned to me and he said, "That was really good." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "I think we've got it." And I said, "I think we've got it too." And that was it. There was no overdubs. It was one take, top to bottom. It was just a great moment. And of course, the track sounded incredible. We had the E Street Band playing on the track and Roy Bittan. It was fantastic.
The wonderful stories of half a century of Air Supply, Graham Russell. Congratulations on lifting the bat for the half century, the 50, like you would have done when you were a kid playing cricket in Nottinghamshire. It's been a
That's
pleasure
right.
talking to you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and please send our best also to Russell.
Great. Thank you, Jason. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, mate. Before you go, I'll get a picture of the
Okay.
Zoom. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you
See you,
very much,
buddy.
Jason.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Cheerio.